Donald Trump is about to shake up global trade again. This time, it's not just about tariffs. His latest move targets the very lifeline of global commerce, shipping.
The United States Trade Representative now proposing potentially millions of dollars in fees for each time a Chinese ship makes a port call in the United States.
A new proposal could impose hefty port fees on Chinese-built vessels entering U.S. ports, and the consequences could ripple through every sector of the economy. The plan isn't subtle. Chinese shipping companies and ships built in China would face fees as high as $1.5 million per port call. Even companies with a mixed fleet, where at least 25% of their ships are Chinese-built, won't escape. Their fees could range from $500,000 to $1 million per port stop. That might not sound like much at first, but most ships don't just dock once. They stop at multiple U.S. ports on a single journey. Every stop means another fee, stacking up into massive costs that could eventually reach consumers. For shipping giants like Costco, the world's largest shipping company by capacity, this could be a major blow. But the reality is, almost every global shipping company relies on Chinese-built ships. More than half of all commercial vessels in operation today come from Chinese shipyards. That's not by chance. China dominates the industry, leaving few alternatives. South Korea and Japan build some ships, but their output doesn't come close. U.S. shipbuilders? They focus almost entirely on Navy contracts and don't have the workforce or infrastructure to compete in commercial shipbuilding. So what happens when you tax the backbone of global shipping? Prices rise. The shipping industry won't just absorb these costs. Carriers will pass them down to shippers, the companies that import and sell goods in the U.S. Those shippers will then push the costs onto retailers, manufacturers, automakers, and ultimately, consumers. Everything from furniture to electronics, clothing to groceries, prices will go up. This comes at a time when shipping costs have already been a roller coaster. Last July, moving a 40-foot container from Shanghai to New York spiked to $10,000. It has since dropped to $5,126, but that's still well above pre-pandemic levels. If these new fees take effect, that downward trend could reverse fast. The reasoning behind the move ties back to an ongoing trade war and a broader attempt to reduce China's influence. The U.S. Trade Representative's office has accused China of unfair practices in shipbuilding and logistics, stating that Beijing's dominance undermines fair competition and threatens economic security. This proposal is the latest attempt to counter China's grip on global supply chains. But trade wars have a way of escalating. If the U.S. imposes these fees, China could respond in kind. The Chinese government could slap new restrictions on American imports or raise costs for U.S. businesses operating in China. The result? More uncertainty, more volatility, and more pressure on global markets.
We are firmly opposed to this unwarranted increase, and we do believe that this is in violation of the WTO rules. So that's why China is filing a complaint at the WTO. And let me also emphasize that there is no winner in a trade war.
For now, the proposal is open for public comment until March 24th. After that, the administration will decide whether to move forward. If the fees go into effect, businesses will scramble to adjust. Some might try shifting to non-Chinese-built ships, but that's not an overnight fix. Others will simply pass the cost down the chain, leaving everyday consumers to bear the brunt. This is more than just a policy debate. It's a high-stakes gamble with real-world consequences. If the U.S. wants to challenge China's shipping dominance, this proposal is one way to do it. But at what cost? That's the question millions of Americans may soon find themselves answering, one higher-priced product at a time. While these actions covered various issues, one stood out: a sweeping investigation into China's grip on the global shipping industry. The findings could lead to massive fines, restrictions, and a shakeup that might redefine international trade. For decades, China has been building an empire at sea. In 1999, it controlled less than 5% of the global shipbuilding market. Today, that number stands at over 50%. Chinese firms own nearly a fifth of the world's commercial fleet. They manufacture 95% of shipping containers and 86% of intermodal chassis. The industry is locked in their grasp, and Washington has had enough. The U.S. Trade Representative is gathering public input until March the 24th, after which the president will decide on the next course of action. The proposals on the table include harsh penalties aimed at Chinese maritime transport operators. Here's what's being considered: up to $1 million per Chinese-operated vessel entering a U.S. port. Additional fees based on Chinese-built ships in a company's fleet, ranging from $500,000 to $1.5 million per vessel. Operators ordering new ships from Chinese shipyards could face further fines. U.S.-built vessels could qualify for refunds of up to $1 million per entry. Beyond financial penalties, there are also restrictions. A rising percentage of U.S. exports must be carried on U.S. flagged ships, starting at 1% and increasing to 15% over 7 years. Certain goods will be allowed on non-U.S. vessels only if a company meets a threshold of moving at least 20% of American products on U.S. ships annually. The goal is clear: break China's stronghold and force companies to rethink their supply chains. But will it work? Right now, 17% of container ships calling at U.S. ports are Chinese-made. For the massive trans-Pacific routes, that figure is likely even higher. The proposed fees could effectively block major Chinese carriers like Costco from operating in U.S. waters. That's a bold move, but one that could backfire. If enacted, these penalties won't just hit Chinese firms. American importers will feel the sting. With Chinese-built ships dominating the global market, alternative options are limited. Carriers will pass on these costs, leading to higher freight rates and supply chain disruptions. The situation gets even more complicated when looking at new ship orders. Over 60% of vessels on the order books worldwide are being built in China. That means even companies outside China are tied to Beijing shipyards. In other words, the U.S. isn't just picking a fight with Chinese firms, it's challenging a deeply entrenched global system. There's another problem: the U.S. simply isn't ready to take over. Only 4% of the world's merchant fleet was built in American shipyards, and most of those vessels are small and outdated. The U.S. lacks the infrastructure to produce modern container ships, tankers, and bulk carriers at the scale needed. Constructing a new fleet won't happen overnight. It requires significant investment, workforce training, and time, things that don't align with immediate political goals. Until the U.S. can produce its own ships, it remains dependent on foreign-built vessels, including those from China. And China won't take this lightly. Shipbuilding has become one of its fastest-growing export sectors, with a 56.6% jump in 2024, totaling $43.4 billion. While ship exports make up just 1.2% of China's total exports, any disruption in this sector could push Beijing to retaliate.
U.S. tariffs on China are now in effect, and China is striking back. The country's finance ministry announcing a 15% tariff on U.S. coal and liquefied natural gas, and an additional 10% on crude oil, farm equipment, and some vehicles. These measures take effect February 10th. This is in response to Trump's 10% duty on Chinese imports.
And retaliation is a real possibility. If the U.S. enforces these restrictions, China could impose its own fees or limit access to key materials like rare earth metals. It could also pressure global shipping alliances to shift business away from American ports. The U.S. might find itself isolated in a battle where China holds more leverage than expected. Meanwhile, American allies are watching. If Washington makes doing business with China too risky, companies in Europe and Asia might rethink their reliance on the U.S. as well. In an interconnected world, one wrong move can set off a chain reaction. This isn't just about ships. It's part of a broader struggle, one that extends into technology, investment, and global influence. Tariffs, sanctions, and restrictions have become tools in a high-stakes game between the world's two biggest economies. Will these measures succeed in slowing China's maritime rise? Or will they backfire, driving up costs, straining global supply chains, and pushing allies closer to Beijing? That remains to be seen. But one thing is certain: the waters ahead are stormy, and no one is sailing through unscathed.
We're thinking about that too. We're talking about a tariff of 10% on China based on the fact that they're sending fentanyl to Mexico and Canada.
How soon? Why don't you write that letter? How soon on those tariffs?
Probably February 1st is the date we're looking at. For Mexico and China, we're talking about approximately 25%.
Europe wasn't safe either. Trump had hinted at similar moves but kept the details under wraps. The message was clear. The U.S. was taking an aggressive stance to boost its own manufacturing and pressure its neighbors on border security, illegal drugs, and immigration. But retaliation was inevitable. Canada and Mexico weren't going to sit back and absorb the blow. And what about Canada? It powered U.S. manufacturing with energy and raw materials. Unlike Mexico and China, Canada actually bought more from the U.S. than it sold. American manufacturers relied on Canadian steel, aluminum, and lumber. Now those industries were on shaky ground. The trade war wouldn't just hit foreign producers, it would drive up prices at home. Higher costs for raw materials meant higher prices for American consumers. Business leaders and economists sounded the alarm. Trump justified the move as a way to restore balance. He claimed these countries were taking advantage of the U.S., and tariffs would even the playing field. He also tied them to border security, pointing fingers at Canada and Mexico for allowing illegal immigrants and fentanyl into the country. If this escalated, the entire global economy could take a hit. Supply chains were too interconnected. If one country imposed tariffs, another retaliated, and prices soared worldwide. A full-blown trade war would mean higher prices, disrupted markets, and financial instability. Also, Trump had campaigned on isolationism, yet here he was, declaring the first move in a bold expansion of American influence. His target? The Panama Canal. He claimed American ships were being overcharged. He insisted, despite Panama's denials, that China was secretly pulling the strings. His base ate it up. But there was a problem, none of it was true. China does have influence near the canal, but it doesn't control it. What China does control, however, is far more alarming. The U.S. maritime industry has collapsed, and China dominates the global shipping network. That is the real crisis. For over 2 centuries, the U.S. protected its shipbuilding industry. This ensured America controlled its own shipping, its own trade, its own fate. But in the 1980s and 90s, Washington abandoned that policy, embracing free market radicalism. While China and other nations kept funding their shipyards and supporting their fleets, the U.S. left its maritime industry to rot. China now produces nearly all of the world's shipping containers, most of its truck chassis, and the majority of the cranes used in U.S. ports. It owns one of the largest shipping companies on Earth. The entire global supply chain runs through China's hands, and that means American businesses are at its mercy. The pandemic exposed just how dangerous this dependency was. When shipping rates skyrocketed, American businesses couldn't move goods. Industrial production fell, inflation soared. Exporters, from farmers to manufacturers, watched helplessly as foreign shipping companies canceled bookings, refused cargo, and rebooked shipments endlessly. A dairy exporter testified before Congress that over 99% of their shipments in 2021 had been delayed, sometimes up to 17 times. Yet Trump's response to this crisis? More of the same. He floated the idea of outsourcing shipbuilding instead of rebuilding America's own industry. His plans to slash federal spending would cripple the Maritime Administration and Federal Maritime Commission, the very agencies tasked with addressing these vulnerabilities. Meanwhile, his broad promises to deregulate would leave American businesses completely exposed to foreign shipping cartels. The U.S. has been down this road before. Decades of deregulation led to the collapse of America's maritime power. Now, instead of securing control over global shipping, Trump is fixated on the Panama Canal, a symbolic move that ignores the real crisis. If America wants to reclaim its strength on the seas, it needs ships, it needs shipyards, it needs policies that put American shipping first. But Trump's plan? It's all smoke and mirrors. The real power isn't in the canal, it's in the ships that sail through it. And right now, those ships belong to China. But Trump wasn't backing down. He thrived on conflict. He had branded himself the tariff man and saw this as a fight worth waging. He promised Americans that these moves would bring back jobs, punish foreign competitors, and make the U.S. stronger. But history had its own lessons. Every trade war in modern history had ended in economic damage. Consumers bore the costs. Industries suffered. And while governments flexed their muscles, businesses scrambled to survive. So the world braced itself. Would this gamble pay off? Or was the U.S. about to step into a financial battlefield with no clear way out? Let me know your thoughts in the comments. And if you want to stay ahead of the latest global shifts, make sure to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell. See you in the next one.